They laughed at her even before the shovel struck dirt. That first clang of iron against frozen rock echoed louder than a gunshot through the valley. And from that day on, every settler within earshot had something to say about Edeline Boone and her ridiculous tunnel. They called it a snake burrow, a rat's escape, a widow's madness. But Edeline kept digging, kept sweating and bleeding and heaving rock from dawn until dusk, even as her baby kicked inside her belly and the men on horseback passed by, grinning with that kind of smile you give to someone who doesn't know how close the cliff edge is. They didn't know what she'd heard that night in November. They didn't feel the wind tear the roof clean off her neighbor's cabin. They didn't watch a family of 6 freeze stiff on the mountain road just 20 feet from shelter. But Edeline had, and she wasn't about to watch it happen again. She'd been a Missouri girl once, born to silks and sermons and hot bread rising in cast-iron ovens. But all that went away when the letter came with the military stamp and the words, "Regret to inform." Her husband had never made it to Fort Bridger. A snow squall had caught his column in the Rockies and buried them alive. No grave, no return, just frost-bitten bones buried somewhere beneath the same wind Edeline could now hear screaming down her chimney at night. So when she came west with nothing but a black dress, a belly full of child, and a last name no man dared call his own, she didn't build for comfort. She built for survival. The cabin had gone up fast. Hand-split pine, chinked with mud and straw. No porch, no trim. Just 4 walls and a stove. But what took longer, what never made sense to the neighbors, was the hole beneath it. She'd started just beneath the sleeping cot, pulling back floorboards, setting them aside like she was dressing a wound. Then came the pick, the shovel, the scraping sounds that carried through the hills long after the sun set. Her nearest neighbor, a trapper named Griggs, said it looked like she was burying treasure down there. Said maybe her husband hadn't died, just run off, and she was digging her way to him. Said lots of things over too many drinks. What Edeline was building was simple. It wasn't madness. It was a root cellar deep enough to walk through, a storage chamber, a heat trap, a place that didn't feel the wind because it wasn't built to fight it. It simply ducked below it. The old widows in Missouri used to say Earth remembers warmth longer than any hearth, and Edeline believed them. Every foot she dug felt like reclaiming something, her own safety, her child's future, maybe even her sanity. But it wasn't the digging that made the neighbors mock her. It was what she did next. She started building stairs, stone ones, carved and fitted and mortared with a mix of lime and sand she hauled from the creek bed, notched the steps down in a spiral, reinforced the walls with crossbeams, dragged in flat stones to build a shelf system, all under a house barely big enough to fit a single bed and a stove. Then she vanished for a week. They said she went mad, said she walked into the snow to talk to her husband's ghost. One boy swore he saw her talking to herself on the ridge, cradling a bundle that was just cloth and stone. But the truth was simpler. She'd gone to barter with the last stonemason left in the territory, a hermit Irishman named Declan, who hadn't laid a proper wall since his wife died in childbirth. She gave him a lock of her hair and 2 weeks' worth of dried venison, and in return, he gave her a lesson in underground arches and airflow pockets. She came back stronger, steadier, with eyes that looked like they'd stared into the belly of the world and didn't blink. By the time the baby came, the tunnel stretched all the way to the hillside behind her cabin. 40 yards of covered trench, hand-cut timber supports, a rope rail for balance, 2 stone vents for circulation, a woman-sized burrow carved straight into the earth, with shelves packed full of root vegetables, smoked meat, coal, tools, candles, and cloth. The baby came early, a girl, pale and silent and stubborn, born beneath candlelight in the very tunnel they'd mocked. Edeline named her Lily, and she never once slept above ground. That winter came late. It teased the settlers with warm afternoons and gentle breezes, making men say foolish things about weather turning soft and God being merciful. But Edeline didn't trust it. She felt it in her teeth, in the prickle at the base of her skull. She kept hauling supplies, kept sealing cracks. She lined the stairwell with wool sacks, set oil lanterns at 20-foot intervals, packed clay over every beam seam. She didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. The neighbors said she was wearing herself thin for a storm that had never come. But on the 4th night of December, it did. It came like a scream out of the northern sky. No warning, just white fury and noise. Roofs peeled back like paper. Horses broke loose and vanished into the dark. Snow hit sideways, thick as mud and sharp as nails. And worse, it didn't stop. It went on for days, then weeks. Edeline didn't didn't light a fire, didn't open the door. She moved underground, sealed the floor above with clay and canvas, kept Lily wrapped tight in layered quilts, ate cold food, sat in silence, let the storm rage. She heard them once, voices outside, shouting her name. Griggs, maybe, or maybe one of the McCarter boys, but she didn't answer. Her breath would have frozen the second it hit the air. No one should have been outside. Then came the silence, and that was worse. It wasn't until the 13th day that the storm eased, and by then, the topsoil was covered with 6 feet of hard-packed snow. Cabin roofs were flattened, doors buried, chimneys blocked. Edeline waited another full day, then she climbed the back tunnel, with Lily tied to her chest, the oil lantern swinging in her hand, and emerged from the hillside like some ghost of the old earth come to check on the dead. What she found wasn't death. It was a frozen world, a valley white and still and broken. But her cabin stood, the roof intact, the walls solid, the tunnel behind her, dry and warm. And as she looked across the hilltops, she saw smoke. Not from chimneys, but from signal fires. Fires dug into the snow, desperate hands waving above them. She walked back down into the tunnel. She'd need more blankets, more candles, because the people who'd mocked her were still alive, buried, trapped, cold, and Edeline Boone was the only one who could get to them. Edeline's boots crunched against the packed dirt of her tunnel floor, the oil lantern casting long, trembling shadows against the timbers. Lily, swaddled and slung tight against her chest, breathed in short, rhythmic sighs. Edeline adjusted the baby's wool hood, then reached for the burlap sack she'd filled with supplies: salted pork, dried parsnips, wrapped flint stones, spare gloves, and 3 beeswax candles, each as long as her forearm. The snow outside had settled into a suffocating silence. No birds, no creaking trees, just the distant crack of ice when the sun, weak and dull, broke across the ridge. Her breath didn't frost anymore, not inside the tunnel, but she could still feel the weight of winter pressing against the outer walls, like a body thrown against a door. She reached the tunnel's back hatch, a heavy slab of iron scrap covered in canvas and clay, disguised under a bramble of pine branches and frost-covered rock. It had taken her nearly a month to drag it up the slope, inch by inch, using a makeshift sled, but now it was her door to the outside, a door no one knew about except Declan, and he'd vanished from his shack long before the snow hit. Edeline knelt, pressing her ear to the door. Nothing. She shifted Lily, braced her shoulders, and pushed upward. The hatch didn't move, frozen. She waited a moment, then dug her fingers into the packed edge and began to scrape. Inch by inch the ice gave. Her fingers bled before the frost did. Finally, with a groan like bones shifting in a coffin, the hatch cracked open, and she pushed it just enough to peer into the light. The sky was white and low. A ceiling of ice hung just overhead. Her tunnel exit sat on the leeward side of a narrow ridge, which had helped shield it from the full brunt of the storm. Still, snow piled around the exit like an open wound, drifted up to her thighs, even at this height. But the air was still. The wind had moved on. She squinted toward the McCarter cabin. Nothing. Then to the hollow where the Griggs homestead sat. Still nothing. No smoke, no sounds, just the low whine of winter memory. Edeline pulled her scarf tight and stepped out, boots plunging through the crusted top layer of snow and into the soft powder beneath. She moved slowly, one hand gripping the rope she'd nailed along the tunnel's outer rim, the other keeping the baby close. Every few steps she stopped, scanned, listened. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement, low, off toward the remains of the church steeple. Someone, waving from the ground. Her body tensed. It wasn't far, maybe 200 yards, but every step would be through waist-deep snow, and the drifts could hide sinkholes, collapsed roofs, even frozen corpses. Still, she moved. She counted the paces, kept her breathing steady, one hand always free in case she needed to dig or defend. A hawk circled overhead, too slow and too low. That meant nothing living had moved in a while. She reached the top of the bluff above the church and saw the hand again, barely visible through the snow. A glove, waving. The rest of the body was buried, save for a small pit dug down to what looked like a cabin's front door. She hurried. By the time she reached it, the wind had picked up just enough to sting her cheeks. The figure in the pit was a boy, maybe 15, maybe 17. His lips were cracked, cheeks gray, but his eyes were sharp. He stared at her as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You're Boone," he said. She nodded. "Where's the rest?" "Inside. 8 of us. Haven't had fire in 3 days. Chimneys clogged. We tried to dig, but—" He coughed, and the sound was hollow. She knelt, shifting Lily so she could dig one-armed. "Help me clear the door." Together, they clawed at the packed snow. Her fingers screamed. The boy wheezed. But finally the door cracked open, revealing a darkness so thick it felt alive. The smell hit her first. Smoke, sweat, rot, and fear. She lit her lantern. Inside, Bodies stirred. They weren't dead, not yet. A woman sobbed when she saw Lily. A man began whispering prayers. Children blinked like moles pulled from the earth. One woman, clearly delirious, reached for Edeline's face and whispered, "The ghost came back." Edeline didn't waste time. She handed the boy her spare gloves, told the man to start warming his fingers against the pork fat, passed around dry cloth and strips of tallow-soaked rag. "We move in 10 minutes, she said. A man laughed weakly. "To where?" "My tunnel." "Where the hell's that?" "Downhill, behind my cabin." "That's a mile, woman. You'll die here." He stopped laughing. She gave them each a length of rope from her pack. "Tie yourselves together. I lead. We move slow. If one falls, the rest pull." And just like that, the woman they'd mocked, the one who dug like a mole and vanished into dirt, became their only hope. The wind returned on the hike back, fierce, sharp as pine needles, and strong enough to stagger. Edeline led with Lily tight against her, the rope looped around her waist and trailing behind her like a lifeline. One by one, the survivors trudged behind, coughing, shivering, half frozen but moving. The boy stayed closest. "Why didn't you come sooner?" he shouted over the wind. "I was listening," she replied. "For what?" "For the silence to end." They reached her tunnel mouth just as the sun dropped below the ridge. By then, the air had gone so brittle she could taste iron in her throat. One by one, she shoved them through the hatch. By the time the last man dropped inside, she collapsed, knees buckling. But she didn't stop. She hauled the iron slab back down, sealed it, repacked the edge with snow and canvas. Then she turned to face them, pale figures in flickering oil light, blinking, stunned, warming their hands against her stone vents. No one spoke, until the old man, Griggs himself, stepped forward. His beard was frozen to his shirt. His eyes were wet. "You dug all this?" She didn't answer, just started handing out food. They stayed 6 days. She rationed everything, let them sleep in shifts, lit candles only when needed. She fed Lily in secret, tucked behind the root crates, knowing milk was precious and eyes were hungrier than mouths. Griggs tried to take charge once, suggested rationing tighter, said her tunnel needed better airflow. She handed him a shovel and pointed to the latrine pit. He never questioned her again. On the 7th day, the tunnel shook. A rumble from above. Snowslide. The lanterns flickered. She froze, one hand bracing the wall, the other gripping Lily. The others screamed, prayed, huddled. The noise passed. When silence returned, it was worse than before. She stepped to the hatch, opened it an inch, and saw only snow, solid white. The exit was gone, buried, permanently. The back door now a coffin lid. Panic came quick. "What do we do?" someone shouted. "We'll suffocate," another cried. "She brought us here to die." Voices turned sharp, eyes turned hostile, but Edeline didn't move. She knelt, lifted Lily, and stood with the calm of someone who'd already buried one family. "There's another exit," she said. No one spoke. She looked to the boy. "You remember the root shelves?" He nodded. "Behind them, crawl space, leads to the original shaft." She paused. "It's narrow, and no light. Where does it go?" someone asked. She looked toward the sleeping cot where it all began. "Under my stove." They dug by hand, pried the shelf loose, tore through sacks of potatoes and cracked jars, found the gap behind the stone, just wide enough for a child, maybe 2 if they crawled flat. The boy went first, then the smallest girl, then the mother. Edeline followed last, Lily tucked to her chest, heart pounding like a war drum. The shaft was black, wet, cold, but she kept crawling because she remembered every inch she'd dug, every breath, every prayer. She remembered, and she would not let them die in the dark. They emerged beneath her cabin, one by one, dragging themselves onto the packed earth floor like reborn souls. The stove sat silent, the light above dim, but they were alive, and the world above them had no idea. The floorboards overhead groaned beneath the weight of snow, packed 6 feet deep. The stove stood cold and silent, its pipe long since choked with ice. The air in Edeline's cabin was still, damp with breath and the faint sting of old iron and oil. They hadn't lit a fire in over 2 weeks now. Fire in a buried house would be suicide. Below the surface, beneath the floor she'd once pried open with her bare hands, the tunnel had become something between a sanctuary and a tomb. It was tight now, overrun with bodies. Every root shelf had been pulled from the walls and repurposed into sleeping pallets. Blankets hung like curtains to partition space. 3 babies slept in makeshift hammocks above a trough of sawdust to catch leaks from the melting snow overhead. The smell was unbearable, but it was better than freezing to death. 12 souls were now living inside her tunnel, 13, counting Lily, and only one of them truly knew how to survive it. Edeline Boone had become something more than a woman in their eyes. In the way the others spoke her name, there was awe, but also unease. They whispered behind her back, Not out of malice, but fear. She was the one who had planned for this, as if she'd known all along, as if she'd wanted this. They started asking questions. Where had she learned how to build it all? How had she known the storm would come? What else had she prepared? The whispers grew louder when she began rationing the water. "The melt's slowing," she said one morning, standing by the corner vent shaft where the ceiling dripped in steady, measured beads into a trough. "We only collect about a quart a day now. We need to conserve." "But there's snow up top," said Martha McCarter, a round-faced woman with a child on each hip. "We could melt more. If we burn fuel, we risk poisoning ourselves. The tunnel isn't drawing air like it used to." Griggs grunted from the back corner. "You mean we're running out of air?" Edeline didn't reply. She simply lit her lantern and walked the length of the tunnel, checking each support beam, running her hand along the packed dirt wall, listening. She didn't tell them what she'd heard in the night. The sound of shifting, earth settling, a deep, low moan, like an animal sighing in its sleep. The tunnel had held through storms before, but not with this many bodies, not with this much weight overhead. That night she sat by the sealed hatch and scratched marks into the wall with a bone sliver. Day 19. The boy, Eli, the same one who had first waved to her from the pit, approached quietly. "You think it'll hold?" he asked. She didn't look up. "If the weather breaks, yes. And if it doesn't?" She finally met his eyes. "Then I've got one last plan." The next morning, the air felt thinner. One of the children vomited after waking. 2 others coughed non-stop. Griggs' face was pale, his lips blue around the edges. The vent shafts weren't pulling anymore. The snow was too dense, too thick. They were suffocating slowly. Edeline knew what had to be done. She climbed to the back of the tunnel where the original hatch had been buried by the snowslide. She began to dig, first with her hands, then with a broken ladle. She scraped and scraped, pulling down frozen clumps, her breath hitching in tight bursts. The deeper she dug, the more the air moved. She could feel it. A faint kiss of wind against her wrist. Someone followed her. She turned. It was Griggs. He didn't speak, just stood there, hunched, holding a rusted shovel. "You going to help or just watch?" she said. "I've been thinking," he muttered. "Not now, Griggs." He didn't move. "You could have saved us sooner. You knew the storm was coming. You built this place for yourself. But you waited." She didn't answer. "You watched us suffer. Watched my wife choke on smoke when the chimney failed. You listened to us scream." Still, she kept digging. Griggs stepped closer. "You were always a little strange, weren't you, Missouri woman? Husband never buried, digging tunnels like a mole. What if this storm is your fault?" She stopped. The shovel in her hands trembled. "What did you say?" she asked, quietly. He leaned in, eyes hollow. "Maybe you prayed for it. Maybe you wanted to be the only one left." She turned, fast. The shovel slammed into the dirt beside his boot. "Touch me again, and I'll leave your body in this wall," she said, voice low, eyes burning. "I didn't drag you out of your grave to listen to lies." They stared at each other in silence. Then Griggs stepped back. "Just thinking out loud," he muttered. She dug harder. By that night, fresh air began to move again. The tunnel breathed. Children stirred easier in their sleep. Faces brightened. But Griggs didn't sleep at all. He sat against the back wall, fingers twitching, watching her. Day 23. The storm had broken above, at least in part. The light filtering through the vent shafts had changed color. No longer that blue-gray haze, but something warmer. Edeline climbed the escape shaft beneath her stove and lifted the top. The cabin was still dark, but the ice had melted in rivulets across the walls. The pressure had lessened. She risked cracking the stovepipe. A hiss of wind came down. Clean air. They might survive this yet. That afternoon she gathered them all in the center tunnel, even the ones who could barely sit. "We've got a decision," she said. "We can wait another week and hope the path out clears, or we dig now." "How far?" asked Martha. "North slope. That's where the sun hits strongest. Less snow, maybe less than 4 feet to the surface. I think we can tunnel through. What if we break through and freeze before reaching town?" "You won't. I'll go first. I know where to dig." "Why not wait?" "Because the air won't hold another week." That silenced them. No one argued again. The next 2 days passed in silence. Edeline chose the boy, Eli, to help dig. They worked in shifts, 2 hours on, 2 off. The others carried buckets of packed snow to be melted slowly in the back vent chamber. They rotated candles, shared silence like currency. And still, Griggs watched. Then, on the second night, he made his move. Edeline had just returned from a digging shift when she found him standing by the food crates. The lid of the last pork barrel lay cracked on the floor. The cloth bag of flour was half empty. He held a knife in one hand and a slab of meat in the other. "You stealing now?" she asked. Griggs turned slowly. His eyes had gone strange, unfocused, yellowed at the edges. "I'm eating," he said. "That meat was meant for everyone." "I'm tired of starving while your rat child eats in the dark." Her heart stopped. "What did you say?" "I said maybe it's time someone else made the rules down here." He took a step forward, and the others, they watched. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stared, waiting to see who would win. Edeline stepped toward him. He lunged. The knife flashed. She dodged left, grabbed the lantern pole and swung. It hit his shoulder with a crack. The meat flew from his hand. He roared, turned, but she was already behind him, driving her shoulder into his spine, knocking him against the dirt wall. The knife clattered to the ground. She kicked it back with her boot, then grabbed him by the collar and dragged him into the escape shaft alcove. "You want to eat?" she hissed. "Go dig your own way out." She shoved him inside and sealed the door behind him. He screamed, pounded, then fell silent. They never saw him again. The dig resumed the next day. Eli broke through the surface on the 3rd hour. Light poured in, warm, golden, real. They climbed out, one by one, into a world they hadn't seen in almost a month. The valley was scarred, cabins crushed, livestock dead, trees stripped bare. But there was sun, and there was wind, and there was life. They never found Griggs. Some said he clawed his way free and walked into the snow. Others said Edeline buried him under the escape shaft, but no one asked her directly, and she never spoke of it again. The town didn't forget. When spring came and the ground thawed, they dug the full tunnel out and reinforced it with stone, named it the Boone Passage, carved her name into the first beam. Edeline never thanked them. She just held Lily close and built a new hatch, just in case. Spring did not arrive with birdsong and blossoms. It arrived with rot and collapse. The valley groaned as the snow receded. The weight of the freeze revealed what it had truly done. Cabins crushed like matchsticks, barns scattered to the wind, bodies uncovered as the ice retreated. Some were found curled in beds, others near doors they'd never reached. The land had not forgiven the settlers, but it had spared one, the one they had mocked. Edeline Boone stood above ground now, her baby against her back and a shovel still in her hand. Her tunnel had held, her daughter was alive, but she knew peace was as fragile as the crusted snow thawing in patches around the broken cabins. By late April, word had begun to spread, and not just among the surviving neighbors. The mail route restarted, and with it came drifters, traders, men on mules asking too many questions. They didn't ask about her child or her stove or the smell of cedar smoke on her clothes. They asked about the tunnel that kept 12 people alive when every other roof had caved in. Some came with awe in their eyes, but others came with greed. The first was a man named Aldous Flint. He arrived riding a piebald horse, wearing a wool coat that was too clean for someone who claimed to have walked through the pass. He wore 2 revolvers but didn't rest his hands on them, not until he met Edeline's eyes. "You're her," he said. "I'm me," Edeline replied, not slowing in her step. "I heard about the cave beneath your cabin. It's a tunnel. Still, folks in Dawson say you built it by yourself, kept a dozen people breathing. That true?" She didn't answer. He smirked. "Doesn't matter. I'm not here for stories. I'm here for the structure. Plans, design." Edeline didn't blink. "Not for sale." "Oh, it's not like that. I want to hire you, pay you to build one like it. We're setting up an outpost west of here. Mining crew. They'll need shelter when the snows hit again." "No," he tilted his head. "We're offering good money." "No." His smile vanished. "This land used to be army property. You know that? Survey maps say it was part of the old transport corridor. You might be squatting, technically speaking." She stepped onto the porch, blocking the cabin door. "You want a tunnel?" she said. "Dig your own." Flint stared at her for a long time, then spat into the dirt. "You think you're some ghost wife saint," he muttered. "You think what you built's gonna keep you safe." She didn't respond, but she watched until he rode out of sight. He wasn't the last. The spring melt brought more than flowers. It brought stories, fantasies, talk of a miracle widow with a tunnel that breathed like lungs. They said she'd lived like a badger and fed her baby moss. They said she'd buried 12 others in the walls just to save herself. She ignored most of it, until the 3 men from the south came with horses and spades, and a blueprint rolled under one arm. They didn't knock, just rode up at dusk, set up camp on the hilltop, and started measuring the land with sticks and rope. Edeline watched from her porch. She didn't ask questions. She just watched. The next morning, one approached. He was tall, raw-boned, sun-scarred. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "we're not here to bother you, just surveying. Won't be more in a few days." She didn't answer. He squinted. "You built that tunnel, right? My brother's a preacher. He told me about it. Said the Lord sent you visions." Edeline turned slowly. "The Lord didn't send me anything." He smiled. "Sure, still it's impressive. Whole town talks about you." "I didn't build it for talk. You built it for survival. I built it because no one came for me." That shut him up. That night, someone tried to open the root hatch. She heard it, the scrape of metal, the shifting rock. Lily was asleep on the cot. Edeline had the rifle in her hand before she was fully awake. She moved through the cabin silent as a shadow, lifted the floorboard, and waited. The sound didn't come again, but the message was clear. The next day, she walked up to the hilltop camp before sunrise. The men were still half asleep, their fire low, coffee brewing in a battered tin pot. She stood at the edge of their ring, arms crossed. "I told you yesterday," she said. "This land is mine." One of them stirred. "Mom, we ain't trying to take anything. You tried to breach my tunnel. They blinked. That's not true, said the tall one. Must have been animals. I've seen animals dig. They don't wear boots. Silence. She pulled something from her coat, a piece of fabric, torn, grey, canvas, still damp, found wedged in the tunnel's outer seal. One of the men swallowed. I won't warn again, she said. Leave. The tallest one frowned. Ma'am, I don't think you understand how valuable that structure is. You could change frontier building forever. We can draw plans, copy the shape, teach it in the territories. I didn't build it for men to teach. I built it to bury myself if I had to. And now you're giving me reason to finish the job. There was something in her eyes then. Not madness. Worse. Certainty. They left by midday. In May, the first family arrived, seeking shelter. The father had frost scars still healing down his arms. The mother walked with a limp. The child didn't speak. They didn't ask to see the tunnel. They only asked if she had flour to spare. Edeline gave them bread, then more. Within days, another came, then two more. None asked questions. They came with hands, not with words. Built fences, hauled water, helped re-chink walls still cracked from the freeze. A new cabin went up near the slope, not deep but reinforced. Shallow-root cellars with vent holes, all modelled after what Edeline had hidden beneath her own feet. The town that had once whispered behind her back now stood in her shadow, and she let them. But not one soul stepped into her tunnel again. She kept it sealed, now with stone and timber. Only she and Lily descended into it. Only she remembered the low moans of wind, the way darkness feels when it's filled with sleeping bodies, and the weight of 12 heartbeats beating in sync with the earth. In July, a rider arrived, uniformed, thin, hollow-eyed. He bore a Union stamp on his satchel and a crumpled list, looking for men lost in the mountain pass. Names, dates, places last seen. One of the names was her husband's, Private Abraham Boone, he read. Gone missing December 2 years back. Body unrecovered, no letters sent. We found remnants of his detachment's gear near the old Shoshone Trail. She said nothing. The rider looked up. You were his wife? I was. You ever hear anything? I did, he nodded. We're trying to mark the last knowns, map out what went wrong. It was the storm. Which one? The one that never stopped. Later that night, she took Lily in her arms and descended the tunnel for the first time in weeks. She moved slow, lantern lit, shadows thick. At the back wall, the farthest point of the burrow, she stopped. A stone slab had been placed there long ago, flat, heavy. She knelt beside it, not to pray, just to remember. She ran her hand over the smooth surface, then spoke softly. They tried to take it from us, Lily cooed, half asleep. They think it's a thing, a design, a strategy, but they don't know. It's a wound. You don't teach people how to scar. She stood, climbed, sealed the tunnel again. The winter of '83 did not come politely. It arrived with thunder in November, strange bone-deep thunder that rolled down the mountains without rain. By the first week of December, clouds swallowed the sun, and men began hammering shutters tighter than ever. There were no warnings this time, no gentle signs. The ground froze overnight. Horses slipped in fields. Chickens stopped laying. Children coughed without end. Edeline Boone stood at the edge of her garden, boots cracking against brittle frost, and knew before the first flake fell that something worse than before was coming. She was no longer the stranger widow with a hole under her house. She was the reason dozens were still alive. 12 of those she'd saved in the tunnel still lived nearby. Most had built homes within a half-mile radius, anchoring their foundations deeper now, modeling their designs after what Edeline had created. Partial cellars, deep chutes, thick insulated walls. They didn't call them tunnels. Not allowed. That word belonged to her. Lily, now 5, stood beside her with wide, observant eyes and a wool scarf tight over her face. She rarely spoke. The dark had shaped her, not in fear, but in silence. Like her mother, she trusted what the earth could hold. By the 3rd week of snow, the town changed. The roads disappeared beneath drifts. Smoke thinned from chimneys. Food lines lengthened at the church cellar. A boy wandered out into a whiteout looking for his father's goats and was found stiff in a fence corner 2 days later, curled like a puppy. Edeline saw the signs, just like last time. And just like last time, no one listened, not until it was too late. On the night of the 12th snow, someone pounded on her door. She didn't answer. The pounding returned, louder, more desperate. She opened it slowly, lantern in hand. It was Martha McCarter, older now, cheeks hollow, scarf soaked. Behind her stood 2 others. One was Eli, now a man with a stitched coat and gloves a size too small. The other was a child holding a basket of wax candles. We need it, Martha whispered. Edeline didn't pretend not to understand. She stepped aside. The tunnel had not been used in years, not for people. Edeline kept it swept, aired, sealed, stocked modestly, but she never again turned it into a shelter. Now she lit the oil lanterns one by one, and the shadows leapt to life. The old wooden ribs of the support beams, the curves of the stone vents, the carved shelves once packed with potatoes and jerky. It was all intact, stronger than the cabins above. Within a day, 15 people were inside. By nightfall, 29. By the third day, 43. And the tunnel strained, not in structure, in spirit. Edeline moved among them like a ghost. She no longer offered warmth or comfort. She gave instructions. She pointed. She rationed. She told the story of Griggs exactly once. "You will follow my rules," she said, standing at the chamber's center with the rifle cradled in her arms. "You will eat what I give you when I give it. You will breathe when I say. You will not speak unless spoken to. This tunnel kept you alive once. It will do it again. But not if you forget what it takes to be buried." And not one person argued. Lily remained in the back, watching. She slept in the same spot she was born, the middle shelf under the first support beam. The others gave her wide berth, not out of fear, out of reverence. They called her tunnel-born when they thought Edeline couldn't hear. Edeline never corrected them. But there were new faces this time. A family from Carson's Fork, 3 kids, a father with a hacking cough, a mother with a broken leg, 2 trappers from the North Trail who hadn't spoken since their partner died in the freeze, a preacher who wouldn't stop murmuring verses to himself even while asleep. And there was the problem. Because survival didn't just test the body, it broke the mind. By the second week underground, the preacher snapped. He began scratching into the dirt walls, passages from Revelation, began whispering of judgment, began watching Lily too closely. Edeline warned him once, then a second time. The third time, she found him standing over Lily's cot with a tin blade in his hand and words pouring from his mouth like blood. She took his hand, broke 3 fingers, dragged him to the surface hatch and forced him to climb. He didn't return. No one asked why. Food ran low, candles burned down, the air went thin, just like before. Only this time, there was no surprise, no innocence, only memory, only grit. And then came the tremor, not loud, but deep, a breath caught in the bones of the tunnel, a sound that made every face go still. The roof hadn't shifted since the last freeze. Edeline had reinforced it with stone and timber, yes, but 43 bodies, compressed air, thinning oxygen. She knew the limits. She gathered them all. "This tunnel is no longer a haven," she said. "It's a bridge." They stared. "What do you mean?" Martha asked. "I mean we're leaving. But we'll die outside. You'll die down here faster." No one argued. The exodus was silent. She led again, just like before. Rope tied between them, children lashed to backs, candles doused, only moonlight on snow. The drifts weren't as high as they'd feared. The wind had shifted south. There was a chance. They moved in lines, one after the other. Edeline held Lily's hand the entire way. She counted each head as they reached the tree line. 42. She turned back. Eli wasn't among them. She found him in the tunnel's far end. He stood by the slab where she'd once carved a mark for every day underground. "I stayed last," he said, "so no one would think they were the hero." She said nothing. He smiled, pale and exhausted. "But maybe I wanted to be. You've done enough," she replied. Then the roof gave, not with a roar, with a sigh, the way lungs deflate. She shoved him forward, into the escape shaft, and as the dust chased them, as the stones cracked, Edeline Boone felt the past collapse behind her. They didn't bury her tunnel. They let it remain, half-caved, sacred. They built a marker of black wood above it, not a grave, not a monument, just a post with words burned into its face, "Where earth sheltered us." And beneath it, carved small, EB, "The town survived," and changed. Every cabin had a root tunnel now, not as deep, not as wide, but deeper than before. Lily grew quiet and long-limbed, speaking only when necessary. When she was 14, a boy asked her why she never slept above ground. She looked at him and said only, "Because I remember the air running out." The widow, who dug beneath her cabin, had once been mocked, dismissed, ignored. But when the freeze came, not once, but twice, and the world turned to stone and silence. Only those who'd followed her underground lived to see the thaw, and none of them ever mocked again.